Hello and welcome back to MyHondaFix. This is episode number 4 of the Key Truck build. In today's episode we will be wiring up the dash accessories and light bar switches. So stick around, and if you have any questions feel free to comment below. Today we begin by doing the switch panel install. We started by placing the panel down exactly where we want it, then we tape over it. Then we pre-drill the holes for the screws and set the screws in place. After setting the screws in place, we can remove the tape, and then we use a Sharpie to mark the 3 large holes where the switches will actually be dropping in. Grab a bit and drill those out. This switch panel will actually have 3 spots. The first spot will be a 12-volt charger socket. The second spot is a 12-volt blue LED voltmeter. And the third spot is a dual USB with 1 amp and 2 amp charging ports. The blue LED voltmeter was actually added so that the driver can monitor the voltage while all the light bars are being used. And if he decides to use a winch in the future, so he can monitor his battery voltage at any given time and make sure that he has enough power to power these accessories. Like we've said before, this is a budget build. This panel was found ready to go on eBay for around $15 to $20. Sometimes you can find them a little cheaper, sometimes a little more expensive, and sometimes you can replace them with different colors and different styles of switches if needed. When installing this, we located the factory harness below where the 12-volt socket would normally plug in at the factory. It didn't come with one on this vehicle for whatever reason, but we were able to find that harness and use the 12 volts directly from that to power everything on this panel. Once we had everything pre-drilled and set in place, we then began doing the wiring. There was actually a ground spot right behind the dash that we were able to connect to, so we didn't have to run the wires very far at all. This was a factory ground post, so the connection was very clean. Just remember that if you're using a factory bolt on the body of the frame, make sure that you remove any paint so the ground wire has a clear connection to ground to the body. If I remove paint once the ground wire is installed, I usually will apply a dielectric grease. This helps prevent corrosion and rust from occurring. The blue wire you see being installed is tied into the radio's illumination, so anytime the lights are turned on, this will activate all the lights on the switches and the accessory panel located above. Like I said before, we were able to use the 12-volt charger socket factory harness that was underneath the dash to supply our positive voltage. This gave us a 10 amp 12-volt source that came on with the accessory on, key on. Here you can see the finished panel installed. This is the best panel we could find to fit this project, as there's very limited space on the Key truck to install options like this. So for the next part of this video, we will be installing the 3 switches for the light bars. We special ordered these switches. They are laser etched. When doing research, we found that the laser etched, when they light up at night, they look much better. You can actually read the words. There are cheaper switches out there that have stickers that go over that show the words. and a few other cheaper switches that when the lights actually come on behind them and they backlight, you can't see what, all you see is light. You can't actually see what is there to read. During the daytime they're fine, but at night you can't see them. So laser etched switches are a little more dark, but they look better overall. These switches are a little larger than your typical on-off toggle switches, so they would not install to the left or right of the steering wheel and the dash up above. So we had to, this is about the only spot on the Suzuki that we could fit these 3 switches, and it was a tight fit at that, but once they were installed they look good. We did go back in and seat some hot glue in between the switches to take up the gaps. That was done after this video. Basically what it did was hold the switches upright so that they couldn't shift at all, and once that was done it made for a much better fit and they didn't move at all. This process did take us a little while, mainly because I was taking my time and being slow with it, making sure that I cut enough room on the top and bottom so that the switches fit snugly and would not come out, and then working my way to each side slowly to make sure that the switches stayed center as much as possible. We had no room for error there, and of course you don't want to order a new dash. When installing straight into the dash like that, cuts like that are crucial. On these switches there is quite a bit of wiring. There's accessory lighting so that they do light up all the time to show you what the switch is, and then once the switch is turned on there's a second light that comes on that shows the other part of the switch. I think it's the picture that it shows that lights up. So the words light up at night, and then when you turn the switch on, the other half of the switch lights up. So there's quite a bit of pre-wiring involved there. And then you have to do all the wiring from the switches to the relays. So you got to add in all the ground wires and the positive wires, run those to the relays, which will then send power to the light bar. I do tend to run a little heavier gauge wire on my projects. The biggest reason I do that is over time, you never really know what the vehicle is going to do. Sometimes there's places where you have unanticipated movement, even corrosion and things like that. This typically, the heavier gauge wires have heavier sheathing, and it also has more wire in place. So if there is corrosion, things like that, the wire typically lasts longer than a thin wire would. A thin wire might corrode and be done fairly quickly. These wires typically have thick enough strands that they self-sustain even if they do get corrosion or hit, nicked, or knocked around. We do our best to tuck everything out of the way, but you never know what the vehicle's going to go through with the end user. Typically light bars do come with installation harnesses, so we are using some of the factory harnesses involved here. Some of the harness I did cut away and rewire different parts just depending on where it was going, location, things like that. Sometimes I want to use a heavier duty wire. Sometimes you just need to extend the wires out further. For the 42-inch light bar that we did on the front, I actually made my own harness. I didn't use the factory harness that came with it because to me it didn't seem substantial. I also opted for another aftermarket relay that seemed a little more substantial as well. This vehicle is going to be used out in a remote location, so failure out in the middle of nowhere, you have no options to fix these things. There is no light out in these areas where this truck's going to be, so if in the middle of the night it's the only thing out there, so we don't really have an option for these things to fail. Also, while you're watching this build, you can see the toolbox there that's been redone. It was smashed up pretty good. We had to straighten the metal out on that. The key, the original lock was there but no key, so we had to install a new lock and key as well. We actually found that at Lowe's, a direct bolt in. It was like a multi-part kit, but it actually fit very well and worked great. pretty much it for this episode. Here you can see the before and after pictures. The before picture where both the switches and panel would be, the after picture with the install completed. Looks fairly good, flows well with the other dash accessories. But as always, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment. We want to hear your comments, if good or bad, whatever you got to say. We also want to know if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll help in any way possible. We'll answer any questions possible. Again, thanks for watching. Have a great day.